Welcome to the 9th regular meeting of the Board of Directors of School Administrative District Number 52. We will start with the Pledge of Allegiance led by Alex Cutter.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. You have before you the 8th regular meeting minutes from December 5th. Does anyone have any thoughts or questions about those minutes? Comments? Seeing none, they are approved by unanimous consent. My report tonight, I don't have much to say, but kind of in the spirit of the holidays, I wanted to give you guys all something, and that is a thank you. All right, I don't have, still kind of a low budget one, but I just want to let you know I appreciate everyone being here. It has been a lot of work for all of us. I don't know if everyone always appreciates how much time people put in at subcommittee, how much goes into this, even sometimes outside of these meetings, and I just want to let you all appreciate you all being here. And Merry Christmas. Moving on to public comment. Before I go too far, is there anyone interested in speaking tonight? Seeing none, we can move forward to communications. We'll start with board chair communications tonight. I do want to recognize a donation to the Turner schools from the Turner Food Pantry. It's a check of $250 to each of the 4 Turner schools to be used to help support their backpack or food closet programs. So thank you to the Turner Community Food Pantry. Carrie.
I just have one resignation, Maria Saravia, library ed tech at Turner Elementary School. Tomorrow is her last day, but I do know we have some tires coming up. We'll have to wait until January though.
Okay.
They're in process, but it's exciting.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Adjustments to the agenda. I don't believe there are anything significant other than item 7.6.2. Ms. Fuller is not able to be with us tonight, so we will not get that report. But moving on, we'll start with our committee reports. Number 1, Finance Committee. I know you did meet tonight, Ashley.
Yeah. We went over the CDS funding, which is the program that's going to incorporate the upcoming 4-year-olds or the 3 to 4-year-olds, and I'm not going to speak too much, because Carrie and Rebecca are going to speak on it this evening. Gabby presented us with the fund balance, which is some estimates which are still going through the formal audit process. She went over the excess balance that they're looking to carry forward, and part of the plan that they're coming up with is $900,000 is they're looking to move into a capital repair fund. And Gabby discussed wanting to upgrade the accounting software and allocating $100,000 in a reserve for that, since the one that they're currently using is quite dated. But she said that would be about a year out, so putting those into a fund balance, and then the remaining would be a little over $1 million that they would have a 2-year plan to come up with for this spend on it.
Very good. Go ahead.
Will we see that in this budget?
Yes. Yeah, so this was all tentative pending the audit. So the audit will confirm these numbers, and then we'll see it come through on the budget.
Okay.
All right. Any other questions? Thank you. Plant Transportation Building Committee. Kyle.
We did meet tonight, especially to just talk about the wastewater treatment plant and the bids that we did receive. We received 2 bids, one from Apex Construction and the other one from T-Buck. T-Buck came in at $2,242,210. Apex came in as a low bidder at $2,059,458, with a difference of $182,752. So the committee unanimously voted to accept Apex Construction as the low bidder. So they'll it'll be on the agenda for the board, full board to approve it at 10.3. And our next meeting is gonna be January 9th,
Very good.
5:30.
Very good. So more discussion around that later on. Any other questions for Kyle? Very good, thank you. The policy committee, Jamie.
Yeah, we did meet tonight. We also have several policies on the consent agenda for second reading, so you already saw them at the last meeting. And tonight, we kind of did a end of the year housekeeping. There were a few policies that we had discussed last year, but were kind of still sitting out there, waiting to be voted on. So we went over those tonight, brought them back onto the agenda, and you guys will see them coming up soon. We also discussed JIE, which is the pregnant students that we had tabled. We did the first reading on October 30th. Carrie got legal advice on that one. So there's an addition to that policy that will come back to the board. And we voted for it not to go on the consent agenda, but to be discussed as an agenda item, if that's possible, so that we can have that discussion and go over the changes that were made. And then the rest of them we're still kind of working on, but you'll see them eventually. But pregnant students should be at the next meeting in January.
I understand these are all second readings, but do you mind just quickly
Yeah, of
reading
course.
off what is?
Of
on the
course,
consent
yeah.
agenda?
So BDA is the board organizational meeting. That's the one that we went and made those changes to, so that it's not a secret ballot anymore. And then energy conservation management in schools, that one is the one that we will be deleting. And that was put to PTB and finance, and curriculum. And they were both in agreement with that as well. And then the extracurricular, co-curricular code of conduct, which was needing to be edited for vaping, those policies that had changed in regards to the e-cigs and vaping. And then the school district commitment to learning results, that also needed to be updated, so.
Okay. Thank you.
And I would just want to mention that when we were looking at the commitment to learning results, I had a conversation with Ashley and then with Carrie in regards to having something on our website about the main learning results for parents to access as well. And so now that's up and running. So you can go onto our district website and under each like math and science, ELA, and you can look up the main learning results on there. So that was awesome that the tech gurus were able to work so quickly updating that.
Very good. Any questions for Jamie? All right, thank you very much. We'll move on to the curriculum committee. Bree.
We did not meet tonight, so our next meeting is scheduled for January 9th at Turner Elementary School at 5:30.
Very good.
Coral's not here tonight.
Yes, Coral is not here.
Should
Move
have said
on
that.
to administrator reports. The first one we have tonight, item 761, is the principal from Leeds Central School, Ms. Bartash.
We've had a couple of really exciting days at Leeds. Last night, our new music teacher held his first concert with beginner and intermediate bands. He put his own flair on it. The parents were very happy, overwhelmingly congratulating him on a nice job. And today, we had Mr. Dodd also help facilitate the opera came to Leeds. So main opera came, Carrie came, and Teresa came to visit. But they came in, they had a really nice, it's students, Jack was one of these students that went to schools. They did a nice job presenting like some different words and how opera is actually not like that horrible thing that people envisioned, and that it could bring community together. Students were interacting, Jack got to sing to the students, so it was a really good day. He was beaming today, so a lot of some arts coming to Leeds in addition to my report, if you have any questions on that.
Let's say the kids were clapping and yelling bravo. Not, it was beautiful, it
They
was
were
awesome.
so engaged.
Bravo!
Yeah, so they,
That's
I
so
mean,
cute.
I was looking at some and watching a few of them, like, okay, but they were like
Yeah.
glued
Yeah,
on the
it was
performance.
great. It was
Where are they at?
A lot of them are from USM, but they're called the Maine Opera.
Oh, yeah.
They do, I think, 4 performances a year, I think he said. But they go around, they've never quite come out this far. But Jack asked if they could. Of course, it was really cool.
Yeah.
Even our janitor, Chip, said.
He was in the row, I saw him sitting
He was in
watching.
the back, and I said, how was it? He's like, I thought it was gonna be awful. But it was good. So, we got Chip's approval, so. Any other questions on the other?
No, I didn't get a chance to congratulate Mr. Dodd directly, but I thought he did a great job last night as well. I know my first year trombone players' sounds coming from upstairs is not exactly music yet, but somehow they were all
Intermediate level.
they were all able to make a cohesive sound together, so that was good.
Trombones
That's
don't
good.
play the melody though, so you probably won't ever hear
Right.
music that you think should be music.
Yeah, and I'll also note, it looks like behaviors are, referrals are pretty well down by comparison, so that's also a great
We're
highlight.
we're keeping that down, the PBIS is working, we're meeting regularly, to kind of like review our data, where is it happening, behaviors. I included the triangle that I heard you liked, and it is just, it's a few students up at the top, and they've moved to tier 2 and some to tier 3 interventions to try to assist them where they're at, but overall, it's a nice, positive climate at the school.
Pretty good.
On that thread, last year, there was sort of a rash of incidents that required classroom evacuations. Is that, the numbers look very, very low, so if there are some, there must be hardly any, but I just wanted to ask.
I think as far as I know, we haven't had any evacuations. A lot of those may not have been evacuations, but let's just relocate. Evacuation makes it sound like a lot of those were preventative, like, let's move kids.
Understood.
I've had one of those this year where people just kind of relocated to help the student calm down. The support staff came in and assisted that student.
Thank you.
Anything else? Thank you so much. All right, our next report, again, we'll be going to 7.6.3. It'll be the Tripp Middle School Principal, Ms. Mate.
It's not the triangle on mine. BAR uses a 4-leveling system, and for board members who are new this year, I sort of did this last year when I did my reports in each trimester after grades were finalized. We looked at grades, attendance, and behaviors for students, and then in our team meetings, students are leveled using the descriptors on the first page. The column in the middle is what BAR suggests would be like a normed percentage for public schools. And those are our numbers after trimester 1, which are good.
Any questions? Yes.
More of just I really appreciate on page 2, the proficiency failure data. That's really helpful, thank you.
And
Do you wanna highlight the 83%?
Oh, yes. So one of our building-wide goals is to have every student at Tripp involved in at least one extracurricular activity or sport, which I guess could fall under the extracurricular. And I think we were at like 72% or 73% after the fall season. And then with the addition of winter sports would be basketball and the cross-country Nordic skiing. And then we also added a drawing club and a knitting club. Those both happened during the day. We're up to, what did Carrie just say? 83%, which is pretty fantastic.
that's great.
The last page too is actually the BAR organization. at the end of our first year last year, they give you like an annual report card that talks about where you're at. And it was evaluated in, as you can see, September of '23 and then May of '24. And then at the end of this year, they'll let us know where we're at, and we use some of that to build our school-wide goals. So I added that, just so you guys can learn a little bit more about FAR. So when I do these reports, it makes a little bit more sense, yeah.
That's great. Thank you very much.
Okay.
All right, we'll move on to the Assistant Superintendent's report. Ms. Gillis.
So I did want to say, as you heard, I did attend the opera here today. I did not know what to expect, but I would agree with Shannon and Carrie, watching the students, particularly I was keeping an eye on the pre-K students, because I just thought, what are the, I used to teach kindergarten, so I was just curious, and they were right in the corner. But it was really great, and to see the students' response to the music teacher here when he started singing, and so I got a chance to learn. I didn't know that he could sing opera. I also attended opening night of the play at Levitt, and I was pleasantly surprised. It was really, really good. So, in addition to those two cultural events, I have been working on curriculum work. The Math Materials Selection Committee met on December 9th. We reviewed our school visits and our vendor presentations to date, and earlier today we had an overview from one of our finalists. We are whittling down the types of materials that we believe will benefit our students. The Health and PE Standards Committee has met, and as a follow-up, I met with the school nurses to review the health standards being taught by our nurses, because we don't have health educators through 6th grade. And so we went through the health standards to see what is being taught by our nurses. And the Director of Guidance, Heidi Poulin, did this work with the K-6 counselors in October. So we could figure out where these standards are being taught and by whom. So that was helpful work to have as part of our health and PE standards work. I have also been working on our integrated multi-tiered systems of support. The district handbook committee, you'll see in a presentation from me and Rebecca in a little bit. That was one of the recommendations, and I have dates set for January as I'll be leading that handbook work. I have had a chance to be in schools observing. We have 2 multilingual teachers, and I've observed them both and was really impressed with what they're doing to connect with students and make them feel as though they belong. I've had 3 meetings, supervision meetings. I supervise the instructional coaches. That gives me another chance to be in schools. And earlier this week, I met with the grade level leaders. We have a grade level leader for each of our grade levels because they're not all in one school. And we continued planning for our January 27th District Professional Learning Day. And then yesterday, I was with a consultant that has been working at the high school and at Turner Elementary School doing some work on clarity. She is the author of the book Clarity for Learning, 5 Essential Practices that Empower Students and Teachers. Her name is Kara Vandas, and it was quite a celebration. Yesterday was the 3rd of 3 sessions that this cohort of teachers has worked with both at the high school, and Evan was with, we were both there for the whole morning, and in the final session, the teachers bring items that show the impact and the progress they've made on this work. They bring examples of what they've learned, evidence from their classrooms, and examples of the student work. And I would just like to highlight that at the high school, it was really impressive to just see the teachers being really, I'll use the word vulnerable about the practices that usually teaching can be quite isolating, but they were talking about changes that they've made to their practice and the impact it's had on students. So hoping, I know Shannon is very interested in working with this consultant here at Leeds, and so I am hopeful we have a meeting scheduled in January sometime.
I'm on my calendar.
It's on our calendar. To see what we can do for work, but really helping students identify what they're learning and why. So
some good stuff. That's all I have to report.
Good, any questions on that? Thank you. We'll move on to our superintendent's report from Ms. Med.
So last week the weather was super annoying. I had to wake up multiple mornings at 4:30 because it can't decide what it wants to do. So I think that's just gonna be the fate of how the winter goes. That's how it was last year. Tomorrow is a half day for all school staff in addition to students. And just as a reminder on the calendar, half of the afternoon is a compensation day for student conferences. Teachers do that above and beyond their normal hours and the night hours. Student-led conferences, though, we had a huge turnout. Almost all the schools are, I think the high school is a little bit lower. That's pretty standard, but the middle school and the elementary schools are all 95 to 98% attendance. So really successful. I did my last safety presentation here at Leeds. Finally got through that with all the schools. I had my monthly meeting with the association leadership. We meet regularly to make sure that we're keeping our communication solid, that we're being proactive and positive around things. One of the items we did talk about was the new Maine paid family leave. All staff have been, all employees have been notified that we're splitting that tax 50-50. There's a requirement in the law to notify everybody. So once we had met to have that conversation, I could finalize that. So, and then we identified items within both contracts that are gonna need to have conversation when we get to negotiations in terms of the rest of the contract and the implications with this new law in place. So, already making the list. I met this morning with the Green Central School Leadership Team meeting to begin, to continue the planning that we are engaged in for a proposal to bring to you all in January, February for a regular early release. We're talking about Wednesday, 1 hour every week. So each leadership team has worked to develop a plan of how they would use that time and what that time would mean for them. So more information on that, but I wanted to have each school sort of take on what that would look like for them before we have that conversation here. And then the last thing will come to you in January, but just as a heads up, last year, and I'm pretty confident everybody remembers this, I talked to you about a change in the agreement with LRTC and the sending schools around having to cover some of the costs. So the superintendents met last week to sort of come to an agreement on a proposal that we would then bring to our school boards. Each school board needs to approve it. And so we're essentially looking at dividing the amount of money that LRTC has in its budget that is above subsidy being divided amongst the schools based on the number of seats we have allocated. So Lewiston has the highest number of seats, Auburn has the next highest, and then Poland, us, Oak Hill, and Lisbon have the same number. So that calculation would happen that way. So if it had been last year, that would have worked out to about $32,000 for us, which is pretty much what the number was that had been thrown around from Lewiston. So I anticipate that coming to you guys. We have to agree to it for it to be in place for the whole region that sends students there.
Do we have to do that before we go through our regular budget, or is that something?
Yeah, no, I'm gonna bring it to you on the January 9th because we need to know that that's the number. I mean, they won't know their budget, like we won't know the number, right? And just like we won't know the number until we get our state subsidy, but to have a general sense of what that is as a placeholder is something that we do need to sort of have in place. So that will come to you right when we get back that next meeting. The consent agenda has the library EdTech 3. Those are in green. Turner Primary and Turner Elementary, their libraries are run by EdTechs, and so that job description is very outdated. So you have a new one, actually. I think we just went with a totally brand new one because it was so out of date. Yeah, the whole thing is new. The one that I started with was so out of date that I just was like, I'm not editing this. We just started with a new one.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been looked at by the association and by the elementary librarian who oversees them. I think that's it.
Okay, any questions for the superintendent? Seeing none, we will move on to the consent agenda. Just a reminder, all the items here are to be acted upon collectively, unless a board member asks that a specific item be acted upon individually. With that, does anyone want to make a motion to pull anything from the consent agenda?
He's ready to vote on it.
He was just ready to consent, I think. Yes. All right, so we'll put a motion on the floor then to approve the consent agenda, which consists of item 8.1, consideration and approval of the curriculum committee recommended second reading and approval of the revised policies 811, which is BDA, board organizational meeting, 812, which is ECA, energy conservation management in schools, and remember that is a deletion. JICI, which is extracurricular and co-curricular activities, code of conduct for middle school and high school students of MSAD52, and ADF, school district commitment to learning results. It also includes item 8.2, which is consideration and approval of superintendent recommended approval of the following job description, which is the educational technician 3 for the library, which the superintendent just noted. Is that motion, anyone want to make that?
So moved.
Joni, seconded by Kyle. All those in favor? That is unanimous. Okay. We'll move on without having any old business to new business, which is a presentation from our Director of Special Education, Ms. Drysdale.
I have a PowerPoint and I printed off slides. They are double-sided, but there is some small wording, so I figured 2 slides a page would work, if you wouldn't mind passing those to me. Then,
Can you send the extra back here just so I can have one for the official record? Thank you. You want to take an extra one?
all right, is it okay if I stand here with the, like, I know, so, like, is that okay? You're back, okay.
Yeah.
You okay if I stand behind you? All right. So, the Special Education Department, I'm Rebecca Drysdale. I'm the Director of Special Education here in the district. And so tonight, the slides that I have, we're gonna talk a little bit about person first language. We're gonna talk a little bit about, or I said I'm gonna talk a little bit, I guess, about special education and Section 504, which is both the responsibility of the Special Education Department. And then we're gonna talk a little bit about 3 and 5-year-olds in the work that Carrie and I have been doing along with Gabby to be able to become prepared for 3 and 5-year-olds. Okay, so our department and our leadership, educational leadership team, has really been working on our person first language. According to the U.S. Office of Disability Rights, it is important using person first language because it really puts a person first before their disability. And when you're working with the Department of Special Education or working with individuals that have disabilities. So examples of person first language would be saying a child who's receiving special education services or a child with a 504 accommodation plan. We might say a child with diabetes under 504, or we might say a child with autism receiving special education services. The reason this is important is because we want to make sure that we're not defining children by their service that they're receiving or their disability. It's also important because we want to see children as individuals first. We want to see every child as equal value. And we also want to have more authentic practices of inclusion. As we'll be talking a little bit more tonight in the next presentation, we want to be able to have more inclusive, accepting language for all of our students in the district. Go to the next slide. So the two laws that primarily function with it, that we follow in the special education department, one is section 504. It's the Americans with Disabilities Act. It's also part of what we call the Rehabilitation Act. That's a landmark civil rights law, was enacted in 1990 to prohibit discrimination against individuals with disabilities in the area of public life, including schools. Then we have, underneath that, a subset of that, we also have special education, which is, special education started with an act called the Education for All Handicapped Children. Then that was a federal law that was enacted in 1975. And it has been since renamed and revised to Individuals with Disabilities Act. So when you see the acronym IDEA, it means Special Education Regulations. This ensures that students with disabilities are provided a free and appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment. I want to talk a little bit about students who may be referred for a 504 accommodation plan would be students that have identified disability, which is either seen as a mental or physical impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. An example of a major life activity is our list below, which could be learning, reading, concentrating, walking, communication, breathing, and caring for oneself. These are just a few of the major life activities that are considered under 504. So when a student is referred to us, we are generally, and the students who are referred for 504, I am the district coordinator, and our school counselors at all of the schools are the case managers. So we go through a similar referral process where a student will be referred, we'll schedule at night a 504 meeting, and then we'll come together and review the student's disability, whether their impairment substantially limits them, and then which of the activities is limiting. And if we determine that it is substantial compared to their non-disabled peers, then we would move forward with an accommodation plan. So examples of accommodation are vary, but some might be, you might have testing accommodations, so you might have extended time on an assessment. You might have preferential seating. You might also have a student who needs to check their cell phone to check their blood sugar levels throughout the day. And they have apps to be able to do that, and we do have students that have that as well. For special education, we have special education teachers and service providers. In order to, I've talked about this a little bit before, in order to qualify for special education, there are 13 set categories of disabilities that students could qualify for. Now these don't necessarily, not always line up with some of the disabilities that students might be identified for. For instance, orthopedic impairment is a wide range of disabilities that would fall under that, along with other health impairment. A student might have anxiety or they might have ADHD, and that would be a category that would fall under other health impairment. But for students with autism, speech and language, hard of hearing, deaf and blindness, traumatic brain injury, those would all be diagnoses that students would fall under that exact category. So when students are referred to special education, we do the same thing. We come together as a team and we meet and we review 3 criteria. We review whether the student has a disability that may already be diagnosed, or we may suspect that they have a disability. We also look at if there's an adverse impact on academic and functional performance. So academic would be reading, writing, and math. Functional performance could be communication, it could be behavior, it could be mobility, in those areas. And then we would look at, do they require what is beyond accommodations that you would have under a 504 plan? Do they require specially designed instruction in order to benefit from their education? Now, the next slide talks a little bit about 504 versus IEPs. So a 504 plan and an IEP, both are kind of housed underneath law, federal law, that we are obligated to follow as a public service. Students who are eligible can, under a 504 plan, would be to access their education. So it could be looking at, it could be a ramp going into the school to be able to physically access their education. And then under an IEP, you'd be looking at eligibility categories for the IEP to see if they were eligible for direct services. And those are those three criteria: disability, adverse effect, and specially designed instruction. For age limits, for a 504 plan, there's no age limit. You could have a 504 plan from birth all the way to death. And a 504, we could have teachers that have 504 plans in the workplace. And you can have people in other various jobs as well as at school. And then IEP for public school will eventually be 3 until we have 22. So students are eligible for IEPs in that realm. And what it does, 504 plan is designed for equal access so that all students can access their classroom, they can access the school, they can access their education. For an IEP, we're really focused on unique needs of an individual based on their disability. And preparing them for the future, which a 504 plan accommodation doesn't, but an IEP plan has, when students get to high school, they have what's called a transition plan to develop post-secondary goals that will see them through their transition to whatever they do after high school. And then what's in the plan, so for 504, you have accommodations and supports. There are no direct services under a 504 plan. We could have OT, PT, or speech, or social work. They could consult under a plan, but they can't, and we can't give direct services under that plan. And then IEPs have goals that the student is working towards. Those goals drive the service, the length and duration of the service. And then they also have accommodations as well. Very, very few students will have an IEP and a 504 plan. That rarely happens because most of what is in a 504 plan could be incorporated into an IEP. However, we may have a student, like I'm just thinking aloud, we may have a student that has a specific learning disability, so they have goals and services related maybe to their learning process of learning and reading, writing, and math, but then they also have diabetes. And the diabetes might impact their access to their classroom during the day, but it's not going to impact necessarily their skills in the area of reading and writing and math. So that would be a case where a student might have both. And then what is required? So under a 504 plan, parents do not need to have permission to implement a 504 plan, nor do they need to be at a meeting for a 504 plan, and there's no requirement to have a written plan. However, I like to be very thorough, and most schools in Maine like to be very thorough. So we come together, we develop a plan. It's a very collaborative process with families. Parents are always included in those meetings. And then we also have a written plan that will follow them from year to year, and is also part of their curriculum. And we also do not implement a plan until we do have permission of the parent to be able to implement the plan. So we do that here. An IEP includes the parent. They are certainly a large part of our team. And we review the plans annually, and we have a written plan. That's a legal document. Both of these are legal documents. And then the plan is reviewed every 3 years to consider eligibility. So we will, most often you might hear what we call triennial reviews, where we will reevaluate a student to see if they still qualify. Just because you might have a 504 plan or an IEP plan early on in your educational career, it does not mean that you will continue to be eligible for the plan. That gives you a little bit of background on special ed and 4-year-olds. So 3 and 4-year-olds, we have been, we'll talk about the next slide in just a minute about the law, but we are tasked to provide special education services to 3 and 4-year-olds by July 1st, 2028. Last school year, 17 districts started to provide services to 3 and 5-year-olds this school year. And then now we're looking at to be part of potentially cohort, what's called cohort 2. So you had cohort 1 last year, you had cohort 2, eventually I'm assuming they'll have 3 and 4, so they'll have those as well. And then this year, there's probably, I think, from what I was hearing, there's close to 40 districts that are interested in being part of cohort 2. So reasons why it's important for us to be considering providing services to 3 and 4-year-olds. One of the pieces through our fact finding that we have found is that CDS is not responsible for the oversight of any preschool programs. So we have 3 and 4-year-olds in our community that are in programs that may be perfectly suitable for them, but they may not be. But there's no oversight of the programs to make sure that they're appropriate for students and their learning. Unlike public school, where we have the structures of principals, instructional coaches, directors, assistant superintendents and superintendents that do have that oversight to make sure that programs are running efficiently and effectively. Another reason is CDS structures do have significantly more administration and overhead costs, which is driving up the cost of services. In our district, we have, much like I just went through the eligibility process, if we have a parent or a teacher reaches out and says, that they connect with me, I'd like to refer the child, my child or my student, we have a set process and protocol that we follow policy, and it goes hopefully as smoothly as possible, but we're able to bring people together hopefully in a matter of weeks. Whereas in the realm of CDS, there's so much management within that many students are getting lost within the process because they have all of these, they do have different roles in oversight and who do you contact and which region do you belong to. It can be very confusing and difficult to navigate for parents and our pre-K teachers. We also have a high number of students, I say we, but statewide, there's a high number of students being served in separate early childhood programs. A large reason of that is there are districts that we know in Maine that do not have preschool programs. So students who qualify for special education that are 3 and 4-year-old, they don't have a public school to go to because they don't have programming for preschool. So that's why we have a lot of students placed in special purpose programs. Maine is also the only state in the country that is not providing special education services to 3 and 4-year-olds. So that is an issue for the Office of Special Education at the federal level, where they are looking at Maine and telling Maine that we need to enact a law and we need to be able to provide equitable services to all students. And then it's been interesting because I did have, the second piece was that children in our 3 towns, when we go to what's called transition meetings from child development services when students are 4, and then before they enter kindergarten. And we have, to some degree, have not been digging in deeply, because we're just so glad they're ours, of whether they are really receiving services from CDS. And there's a wide range of what students are receiving, our 3 and 4-year-olds in the 3 towns. There are some that are receiving all of the services. They are going to preschool, they're receiving their speech services, they're receiving their specially designed instruction. But there's many that I'm finding out as I'm really talking to our service providers who we contract with that play a role in CDS land in our area that we're not providing, that CDS is not providing all of the services for our students. So this is another reason to be able to bring them in to make sure that they are getting the services that they need. So legislation and the law, so LD 2214 became public law in 2023. And then a subset chapter of that really talked about funding and how funding was going to be allocated. There has been two laws last year. That one was that public school was gonna be taking over 3 and 5-year-olds, and then you had this other law, which had passed, that really was the funding model, which probably was very important and probably should have been the one that had passed, so that's good. So this law talks about the responsibility, which I had mentioned, falls to public school on July 1st, 2028. Public school services will we will provide special education services either directly or through contracted services for 3 and 4-year-olds. And 3 and 4-year-old services, at this point, we are being guaranteed through the DOE, I don't know how long it will last, but we are being guaranteed that they will pay 100% of the services students need, the furniture we need in our pre-K classrooms to make sure they're equitable across the district, instructional materials that we need, and any sort of equipment, adaptive equipment that we have. And then we have the CDS is going to turn into what's called regional hubs. And so those regional hubs are whatever we decide we need from them. And at this point, I know the big piece that we've talked about in the previous cohort is being able to access services through them. So if we have, for instance, if we have our OT providers, if they are maxed in the number of students that they have, but we have a student that we know that's either 3 or 4 that needs OT, we may be able to contract with the CDS hub to make sure that we have a service provider through them that will provide that service. They would be kind of the person that would connect us, but we would be working directly with that provider. Any questions about that? Yes. Oh, I don't know if this is called.
Yeah, go right ahead.
So if we had a 4-year-old who needed services that would have to come through, say, Margaret Murphy, those would be paid 100%.
They say that they will be paid 100%, even through special purpose private school tuition.
Excuse me, are most of our kids who are beginning in pre-K 4? And so is this like really, are we like digging down to like 3-year-olds?
So I'll get to the next slide, which talks about when I was touring with a main DOE representative, and I had said to her, like, we already have 4-year-olds. Like, am I missing something? Like, they're already here. Like, maybe I don't understand what's happening, because I'm thinking, like, we just go down and provide services to the students that are 4-year-old. And she said, no, she said, that's what it is. And she was like, but the piece of that would be, we offer 4-year-old programming. And so we could just go down and provide those services to them. We do not provide 3-year-old programming. And so what that would be is we would have child find obligations to find 3-year-olds if they weren't coming to us from the DOE. The DOE provides special ed services for birth to 2-year-olds, and then up to when they turn 3. And so they could transition to us, and we'd know about them, we'd be able to program for them. But for the 3-year-old, we would need to be able to have parents communicate with us, daycare providers communicate with us, and be able to go through much like the same referral process I've been talking to you about for the 3-year-olds.
Well, I was lost too, so.
Yeah.
Just like, wait a minute. Okay, thank you.
You might not know the answer to this, but since we are the only state that doesn't do this, in all of the other 49 states, does their state DOE also fund their programming, or how does it work in other states?
I don't, yeah, you're right, I don't know. the answer to that question, whether they do
Good
or
question.
not. And I think maybe the law passed because they, and I don't know, I don't wanna speculate, but it could be, this is a piece to help districts get programming, special education programming for 3 and 4-year-olds up and running. But we could find out. All right, so steps and planning. So we've been pretty busy this fall in trying to gather as much information. And Superintendent Midd and I had an understanding that we'd find out as much information as we could, and at the same time, we were also skeptical and looking for, okay, thinking about barriers. Is this gonna be a barrier? Is this gonna be a barrier? Is this gonna be a barrier? And we agreed that if there were barriers that we couldn't overcome before next school year, then we wouldn't move forward. But as we're finding out more information, there haven't been any of those barriers. And the compelling reasons that I had shared earlier really have outweighed anything that has come up, which is we want to be able to provide services to the students and children in our community. So part of our fact-finding is that we've attended multiple general information sessions about cohort 1 and what cohort 2 would look like. We've also attended individual meetings with the DOE and CDS representatives. We've talked to cohort 1 participants. We talked with the director and superintendent as well. I had toured the 3 schools with the DOE representative, Lori Whittemore. And she was able to speak to all but one of the pre-K teachers, and I was able to follow up with that pre-K teacher. But touring the classrooms, taking pictures of the classrooms of furniture, because at this point, one of the major selling points is being able to have the DOE provide us with furniture that we need to make sure that all of our classrooms are equitable, any sort of student materials. So like in Leeds and Green, we could literally outfit their whole classrooms with lakeshore furniture, which is like, of educational furniture, beautiful maple furniture and sensory tables and those sorts of things, full kitchens, but play kitchens, and drama sets and all those fun things. But then in Turner, really looking at what do 3-year-olds need in Turner. So Leeds and Green would be able to have those pieces and all of the instructional material. But in Turner, they have a lot of that. So they really were looking at what are they gonna need. They're gonna need one-piece puzzles. They're gonna need writing utensils that are adaptive. They're gonna need other games. They're gonna need books for 3-year-olds. So there's lots of materials that way, and the DOE is going to be sending us a list of materials that our teachers can choose from that will be ordered and then sent to the schools. Which when does this happen? So how can we not take advantage of that? And then student needs, we've also been looking at prior student potential projections, which I'll get to a slide on that. We've been learning about providers to be able to support students and where we could find providers, and we've been learning about the funding model as well and what that looks like. So pieces that we're continuing to do, we have our little local team of our superintendent, myself, the business manager and transportation director, because we're going to be able to, we want to make sure that we have planning, staffing, and the vehicles to move them around in. And then looking at, we are doing we've been doing a kind of a self-assessment, but we don't have anything on paper that we can check off that say, yes, we can do this. We've been through the kind of self-assessment mode and making readiness plans. We've looked at our spaces and our needs. That's what I did a tour with Lori Whittemore. We're looking at our staffing and our needs, so I'm talking with all of our service providers, and we're looking at caseloads and looking at what contracts we may have to establish, or more contracts. And then also identifying potential partners that can be out there in the community, so daycare centers, daycare providers, preschools in our community that we can partner with. And along with looking at CDS hubs, because I think that's but staffing is a big thing in special education and trying to get all the staff, so using those.
The CDS hubs, are those gonna be around for the foreseeable future, or is CDS phasing out since they're, putting the responsibility on the districts, or are they making a commitment to staying in the game, I guess, to?
I think right now, the DOE is telling them they're making the commitment to have them stay around and to be accessible and supportive to school districts. But I certainly think there's a fear when we've been talking with the representatives from the DOE, they've been talking about like they might wanna leave CDS and come work in our district. So that's where we can develop some of partnerships, a little bit of poaching.
Are these, when my son was little, we lived in Georgia, and so he got services from 0 to 3 at the school. And we brought him after school hours, and there was an OT and a PT there, and a speech therapist. How is that gonna look here? Like, if it's after hours, are we contracting people to work after school hours, or are these kids coming into our district during school hours?
Well, we have the 4-year-olds now, which is amazing, so we're very fortunate to be in that place. And we've been talking a lot about 3-year-olds. We don't have a high number of 3-year-olds, so I think I think a lot of our activities are gonna be around the child find and the referral process for 3-year-olds. For the 3-year-olds that we have, the IEP team would decide, would it be good for them to start transitioning to public school? Like if we were to have let's just say we were to move forward and we have an eligibility meeting now, the team would discuss what would be the benefits of having them come to public school with 4-year-olds, having some sort of multi-age experience, or would it be better for them to remain in daycare or to remain in the preschool that they are in, and either have them start with us next school year, at the beginning of the school year, or would we do something towards the end of the school year where they start coming in for speech or OT or PT services. So I think we're trying to look at it flexibly, creatively, and being really student-centered. We have talked about we're meeting with pre-K teachers right after break and then looking at if we had a handful of 3-year-olds, could they come to our 4-year-old program? That's what many of the other cohort 1 schools are doing, is they are providing 2 half-day sessions for 3-year-olds, and they're finding we have there's a lot of angst and worry about 3-year-olds mixing with the 4-year-olds, because developmentally they are different as they're learning and growing. But we heard from Lori Whittemore and all of her tour and meeting with the teachers that they're having great success with the 3-year-olds coming into school and learning about school, and then the next year being at the same school again to be able to support them. And they're talking about the 4-year-olds are mentors, and they're able to shine on their skills as well.
So you're gonna beef up staff if that happens?
Beefing up staff in terms of special service delivery, yes. Yeah. But at this point, like I said, I don't see our numbers being high at this point unless there's something I don't foresee. But some of our schools are under our pre-K numbers that we can have, because I think we can have up to 16 per session and an ed tech, and some of our programs have 10. So there's some wiggle room to bring in some 3-year-olds. But we want to be thoughtful and mindful of both 3-year-olds and the pre-K teachers and staff to do something well for them. So I had this thought of, because I was because I want to have a number, I want to know how many and I know how many we have now. of 2 and 3-year-olds who are going to get older and be 3 and 4-year-olds next year. So I thought the best thing to do was actually look backwards to figure out what we might need ahead of us. So I looked back at our projections, and I shared a little bit before, but generally, what's happened up until maybe next year was that students who are 4-year-old would be serviced by CDS. We'd have a transition meeting in the spring, and then they would come to us in kindergarten. And so I looked at the numbers of those 4-year-olds that had come to us in kindergarten. So in 2022, which is odd, we had 22 students of 4-year-olds entering kindergarten. 23, we had a larger group, 33 students. In 24, we went down and had 18 students. And so right now, we know we have 13, either 2 or 3-year-olds. We have that are either identified for special education services or are in the referral process. So I think we're kind of thinking that we'll have anywhere maybe between 20 and 30, which seems to make sense for 3 and 4-year-olds next year in our 3 schools, not all in one, but spread out. So when,
Excuse me. So the previous years, you're listing 4-year-olds, and then in the last year, you're listing 2 and 3-year-olds. That's because the 4-year-olds are already here.
Yeah. No, I'm thinking about who we're gonna have next year for 3 and 4-year-olds. So I'm looking at who I have now for 2 and 3-year-olds through the DOE. And then they will be ours next year. It feels funny to write 2-year-old on a slide. So then services equal staffing, so whatever, as the team decides what services are needed for a student to benefit from their education is going to dictate in our funding what we're gonna have for staff. So we know that 3 and 4-year-olds are probably gonna need specially designed instruction in academic readiness, and behavior, learning how to be a student. And then speech and language services, occupational therapy, speech therapy, where our school psychologists are gonna be doing evaluations of our little people, and we'll be providing consultation to our teachers. So that means most likely our funding we will be funding, that funding that we're getting from the DOE, we'll be funding a case manager, a coordinator, to be able to help us coordinate the 3 and 4-year-old services, special education teachers, speech and language pathologist, OT therapist, occupational therapist, physical therapist, school psychologist, and behavior specialists. These are all people that we currently employ, but if we reach our capacity that we can do that, we'll need to employ additional staff through the funding that we receive. And then this is Carrie's slide.
You gotta click on that. So the funding calculations, the DOE sent us just make that as big as you possibly can.
So,
Press the green button. Actually, it'd be easier if I just come and touch your computer. I thought it said they'll do it from mine, but it doesn't work that way.
well, maybe 150, and then you can slide.
Yeah, I'll just do it from here.
Okay.
So they sent us a spreadsheet where we can just plug numbers in and sort of see. So right now, you have, let me see if I can, oops, sorry, that was bad. Okay, so the formula's already in there. All we have to do is change the number of kids, and it gives us the amount of money that they're gonna send us. So right now, we know we have 6 students identified. So when we walk across, and there's a bunch of calculations, like extra weight for all of them, whatever. But if all we ever had was 6, what did that just happen? Jeez,
Yeah.
So if we had 6 kids, and that's all we had, we'd have $123,000 to be able to fund the services that they need, okay? But the numbers are we have 7 students that we know are in the evaluation process. So it's an additional $1,000 for those students, it's $130,000. At some point, we'll probably be close to that, like 25 to 30 students. So if we get to 25, then that number goes to $500,000. So what the DOE has told us is that, they'll start funding us July 1. You will see no reference to this money in the budget process. This is all outside of the budget, it's not revenue, it's just separate grant for 3-year-olds. So it won't, it may impact some of the staff we have who may be able to, who may end up getting charged to that money. And so maybe a little bit less to the budget. That part I think is a little bit fuzzy right now for us. But that, they'll just start paying us July 1 to build up our services. And then October 1 count is sort of like the final number. That is the least amount of money you would get, that number. So if the numbers, as the numbers increase beyond October 1, which is likely because kids turn 3 and we pick them up, then we start getting more money for each child that we pick up. So there's like a cutoff of a minimum. They're not gonna take any more, you know, if we lost kids after October 1, they're not gonna reduce the funding. We know we can count on that. So it's about $20,000 a kid, basically.
We just had a conversation about equitable furniture and all kinds of other things. Is that reviewed differently, or is it straight calculation like this? It's
That
dollars
money
per
has,
student?
that's not a part of this money.
That's not a part of this at all? That's a
No.
completely separate?
Totally
reimbursement.
separate pot of money, that if we don't go cohort 2 will not be available to us. So it's a separate pot of money that the DOE set up through the budgeting process to help districts get started. They have enough money for cohort 1 and cohort 2, but they've told us that pretty much after cohort 2 it's gonna be
So
gone.
it's somewhat of an incentive for us to come on now, then wait. Okay.
I think that's it.
That's all. Oh,
Great. Any other questions there? I will say, I have some level of involvement in a lot of the things that you mentioned tonight, as a parent. And so I was somewhat familiar with a lot of the terms you were throwing around, but I know that it can be hard if people haven't had any direct experience with IEPs or anything to really fully understand what those things are. So I don't know, I would really encourage you to ask questions now if you have them while we have some stuff here. But I thought you did a great job laying that out, so.
thank you.
Yes?
Yeah, no, it was a great presentation. I have experience as you do, Joe, and I think that just in the early stages, I think that anytime you can shrink a program from a state level to our control, it's gonna be positive, especially for the students. I know with my daughter, she was diagnosed autistic when she was 3, just about 3. Been very hard to get services. You have to be a pest, and the providers tell you have to be a pest, which I'm not by nature. And so if you're not calling the places you're on waiting list for, you just stay somewhere at the bottom. So I mean, we've done speech therapy in Gorham. We're doing speech therapy now with a lady in Pennsylvania via Zoom. So it's, I think this is only going to be positive for the kids because it localizes it. I mean, for the simplest term, but no, I think it was, like I said, it was a great presentation, and it was very informative. So,
Thank you. Yeah. Go ahead.
Also, great presentation. I really appreciate the breakdown of the 504 and the IEP. I also just kind of wanted to touch base on something to piggyback on what Alex just said. We had to have our daughter be evaluated for speech therapy, and it was, you had to be a pest, you had to constantly call people. We had to go to Oxford, and it was like completely way out of our way. So having something like this for our families would be, I think, tremendous, and it makes me want us to start a preschool. So if we could work that into the budget, I just think that would be great, so that we can keep all of our little ducks close to home. Because I mean, our daughter was evaluated, or it was at a preschool in Winthrop. So to be here would be lovely.
Yeah, I
Might need to build some things, but,
Well, you know,
it's just buildings.
We have land.
yeah, we
No, we don't.
no, we don't have land.
We don't, the town. There's lands out there. There's land out there.
No, I remember hearing about this initially, feeling like here's this mandated imposition of services onto the district, and how's this gonna work? But it sounds like it's gonna be more convenient for parents and kids, it's gonna be paid for. It seems like it's, as long as we can find the staff to implement the programs, it sounds like it's pretty good all the way around. Okay.
Yeah, and I would think, based on what you're saying, like the patchy services beforehand, you're also looking at, you know, two parents here that are clearly very involved in the school, their volunteer time on the school board. And, you know, have the ability to pester and get services and transportation to get there. But it seems like many don't, and so these kids that have significant needs aren't getting what they need. And I have to imagine that some of those behavioral issues stem from not getting services early. So they have this communication barrier that's frustrating them in the classroom that might come off as a behavior. And so our district getting to them earlier in a school setting where they're learning early behaviors is probably going to help our other students as well, because you have kids that have learned to behave in a classroom setting and have gotten the services that they need. So I think overall, the program is gonna benefit everybody. It's awesome.
So you took the words out of my mouth, Joe, about so I'm interested in whether or not there is any worry that an increased number of students will require us to hire people who we can't find.
Yes. Always. That's not gonna, I mean, that's current, that's true now. But you know, it's interesting, my sister-in-law works for Head Start, and she's sort of, this transition is impacting Head Start. And schools in general, I mean, Rebecca and the staff who, like, kids get services. It may not be perfect Zoom, right? But they get services. So even if it's like 100,000 contracts, which is what we do, like we have staff, but we have 1 billion contracts. Rebecca and I spend a lot of time like reviewing them and getting legal and making sure, you know, and editing them and all that. So we're just gonna keep doing. We'll just keep doing what we gotta do. But yeah, there's staffing shortages everywhere. So it's definitely gonna just be more of the same challenge, but not. I don't know. It's a challenge we've already been dealing with and finding ways to deal with it. Rebecca's very creative, sort of making partnerships with agencies and private providers, and you know, if wheeling and dealing, can we get you, and then you can be a social worker on the side while you're doing this. Like some of that's happening this year. So I think there's a lot of that happening all the time already.
We might as well get first dibs on the people
Yeah, and
available.
CDS is not doing that, right? Because they're actually spending so much money on administration. They're not, and we've picked up a CDS teacher. You know, the second FSP program that we opened up here, we pulled in a teacher from the CDS program in Oxford. Sort of, she's seeing the writing on the wall, and she's ours. So hopefully there'll be more like that.
All right, I was gonna say thank you. It looks like you're on our next agenda item as well. So, item 10.2.
It's a double dose.
Yeah.
We're gonna throw Teresa in the mix though. I
Yes.
have a handout for you guys.
All right, so item 10.2 is a presentation by the Director of Special Education and our Assistant Superintendent on the district progress towards building an integrated, multi-tiered system of support.
Do you need one? No? Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, well, we'll give Rebecca a break. I'll start, but not for long. So this evening, we are presenting some findings and some recommendations. Last spring, our district took part in an external audit. I don't know if you remember Rebecca speaking of it at board meetings, of special education and the support practices that we have in MSAD52 for all of our students. It started out as a special ed audit. Rebecca and I share a wall, a thin wall, between our offices, and one day she popped in and said, why don't we look at this? Are you interested in adding more to find out more on how we can support students who need work outside of special ed? And I said yes, and so the journey began in earnest. So we're going to talk a little bit about the audit tonight, along with our key findings and recommendations.
So we began, I think I mentioned this last year in my presentation to the board, talking about our partnership that we were going to establish with UMF and consult with Dr. Kate McLeod and Dr. Jessica Apgar and do a equity review audit. And as Teresa mentioned, it first started out through really just looking through the lens of special education and really looking at our service delivery models, and then it expanded to include intervention and also our core instruction. So really looking at core instruction all the way to special education. And so part of this was, another reason that we're also looking at this was, I've also talked about the high number of referrals to special education for services that may or may not be warranted for students. We're also looking at the high number of students that are being removed from their classroom to be able to receive specially designed instruction, but that instruction or intervention, but that instruction is supplanting core instruction. And if we're giving them SDI and intervention and they're not being exposed to core curriculum, how are they going to be able to have the same outcomes as all of our other students through their transition plans? And we've also seen our data. And students with disabilities may be making growth from plan to plan, but they're not making the growth that they need to be making because they're not in their classrooms to receive the core instruction, but they're being tested on core instruction. So it doesn't really add up. Another piece that I talked about, the Office of Special Education came in and said to Maine, you have to start programming for 3 and 5-year-olds. They also had shared with us that we're the 5th least inclusive state in the country, where we have the highest, we're the 5th highest number of states that are removing students with disabilities from their core instruction for a large portion of their day. So they had also told the state that they've got to be able to remedy that along with our 3 and 5-year-olds. And we just so happen to have Kate McLeod and Jessica Apgar, who are on the steering committee for the Department of Education looking at inclusion. And they're working with us, which is awesome. And the next slide. So last spring, we developed our collaborative review team. And our collaborative review team, our facilitators were Dr. Kate McLeod and Dr. Jessica Apgar from UMF. We had our district leaders, Teresa, myself, and Carrie and Lucy Davis, my assistant director. We also pulled in all of our principals, and we have some deans as well as assistant principals. We had our instructional coaches, we had general education teachers, special education teachers, we had an interventionist, we also had a school board member join the team, and our resource officer. And this is the team that really spent a lot of time working together starting last spring and over the summer, spending several sessions looking at all of the data and being able to come up with recommendations for the district based on the facts that we reviewed. So part of that data collection, so you can have an understanding of that, was that we compiled staffing levels across the district, all instructional staff. We did an artifact review looking at our policies, procedures, and our school handbooks in relation to special education and intervention and core instruction. We did have send out parent surveys. So we sent out parent surveys in the very beginning of the process. So we sent it to parents of students who were receiving special education services. We in hindsight, we wish that we held off on that a little bit longer to include more families, potentially all parents or parents of students that were receiving interventions in special education. And then we did a staff survey. All instructional staff participated in the survey at the end of last school year. We also looked at student demographics. We looked at disability services and placement. We looked at our achievement data for students with and without disabilities, K to 12. And we also looked at our disciplinary data. Both Jessica and Kate came several days. I probably walked every hallway in the school peeked into the classrooms, met with principals, met with coaches, had follow-up Zoom meetings as well, really examining what intervention looks like, what special education service delivery looks like, and getting to really meet the players and hearing from the staff of what our students were experiencing and what they were experiencing as well.
So here are the key findings that came out of all that data collection and review. And this was really provided to us, that these were the key findings. And then the district team spent time creating the recommendations. But the number one key finding was that there's strong motivation and commitment in the district in terms of wanting to make changes for all of our students to improve their learning situation. The second one, an over-reliance on separate locations. So what that means is that if I were a student who was receiving Title I reading support, or if I was a student who needed math specialized instruction, specially designed instruction, I would leave my general ed classroom and go to a separate location to have instruction, which we might think is really good, but then what am I missing when I'm out getting those services? And by it doesn't mean that those services would never be provided in a separate location, but there's definitely an over-reliance in our district. There's not yet a common understanding of terms and practices in terms of what things mean and what does intervention mean. Why do we gather data to see where students are? Is it just to refer them to special ed? Or is it so we can change our instructional practices to provide what the students need? Also, the collaboration between general ed staff and students in special ed has not been prioritized. It just means there have been other priorities that had not been prioritized at the time of the report. Interventions and specially designed instruction are not always provided by the most highly qualified staff. When I was a principal at Turner Primary School, I often hired educational technicians to work with students who had teaching degrees, and they were looking for a job. And they might be ed tech for 2 to 3 to 4 years before becoming a classroom teacher. Those days are drastically changed, as you know, about staffing shortages. And it might be that some of our ed tech positions are filled by long-term subs, or they're filled by people who have not had training in the field of education and working with students with disabilities or with needs. It does not mean that they're not good human beings. We feel like our responsibility is to really ramp up their training. If they want to work with us, we need to make sure that they have the skills. And students with and without disabilities are not meeting academic achievement, proficiency, and growth goals. So I don't think anybody here is surprised by that. You've seen some of our data, and it's not good for students with or without disabilities. And then on the next page, nope, that's all the key findings. Okay, so now we're up to recommendations. So during the past summer, as Rebecca said, the team met 3 times to review the findings and create recommendations for the district work. So we had Jess and Kate on site with us. They were leading us through, we had lots of discussions about what the findings meant and then where we wanted to go from there. So first of all, we felt like we need to create a rationale for the district's work. Why are we doing this? We're doing this because Maine is the 5th least inclusive state. We're doing it because our students aren't making academic growth. We're doing this because they're receiving services in place of their core instruction. So all of these reasons are the why, but we need to really work on explaining that and making sure people understand that. The second recommendation was to create a district handbook. I mentioned that in my report. We're going to hopefully do that in January. That includes the vision, the framework, the processes, definitions, roles, responsibilities, and resources. And we've already been given some samples as well as a framework to go through this work. It's up to us. Another recommendation is to create responsive professional development that aligns with district vision for inclusion and collaboration, and then create a data review system for both schools and district that really help us in our work, not just a collection of data. Another piece that is a recommendation is to prioritize strengthening core Tier 1 academic and social emotional instruction. So now all of our students in our elementary schools participate in the second step program that talks with them about how to react when you get upset, what to do when you want to make a friend, so that they're learning that piece. And then in terms of the core academic instruction, you know that we have new instructional materials for reading and writing this year. We're working on math. We really need to look at what our students are using for resources and what they have, and what our teachers and ed techs have for training and support. Implement a curriculum review protocol, so it's more planned and systemic and not just random as to when we look at what content area. And then all students will have increased access to general education settings.
Okay, so this fall, who was telling Teresa, I was feeling a little wobbly, because we have this plan, and we have all this data, and we have these recommendations, we need to make a list. We need to make a list of what we're doing, what we need to do, and so hence the list that you're looking at right now is part of some of the pieces we're working on. So one of the things that we're wrapping up tonight, but we're hoping to also be able to share our findings with families, is presenting our reports, our findings and recommendations. We've met with all 6 schools, and tonight we're talking with you. We have, and then part of this work as well is we have Dr. Kate McLeod and Dr. Jessica Apgar have also helped us write an equity report. So we have an equity report that specifically talks about this audit process, the data, the findings, the recommendations, aligned with research. And so we have that available. If any of you, just let us know if you'd like to see it. It's a robust report. And then we're working, as Teresa had talked about, on our curriculum, our core curriculum. We've been working on that since September to present. We're also working on training our district support staff. We had a day in the fall when we were able to have Dr. Jessica Apgar come in and meet with all of our support staff, our interventionists and special education and techs, and talk with them about this process. I presented this information to them as well. And then in the afternoon, we actually watched videos through Inclusive Schooling, which Julie Costin and her partner have established, and they're the gurus of inclusion, and so we have bought a subscription to that, so we're going to continue working through those videos with our support staff and talking with them about it, along with other professional development. We've also had increased access to general education resources with interreading, so we're having increased access for all of our general education teachers and our special education teachers, and our students having more access to that program and curriculum. We've also had focus training for Turner Elementary School, which will have one of the videos from Turner Elementary School this evening to show you. And they have had additional training with Dr. Jessica Apgar. And then, as Teresa mentioned, the district handbook.
So we do have a few videos to show you. This first one, Kristen Conway, the principal at Turner Elementary School, interviewed the fourth grade teacher, Margaret Muse, who is a member of the fourth grade team working to provide inclusive co-teaching learning environments for students. And we did test the videos out, and we're hoping they're going to work.
Can you share a time when you adapted a lesson to make it more accessible for all students?
Yes. So I would say just recently what I've been trying to do is when it is time to answer questions about the story that we've just read, what I like to do is have the students work in groups, but I'm really careful on how I assign those groups. So what I try to do is I have some of my higher achieving students with my special education students in a group together. That way they're learning from each other. So that's a way I've kind of adapted the lessons and made them a little bit more accessible, because if I was just expecting them to all raise their hand and answer the question that was on the TV, I don't think I'd get a lot of engagement either. So I think by working in groups and having kids really learn from each other has really been working recently. Yeah.
And what's a success story that makes you proud of your work in inclusion?
Okay, so even just today, we had a lesson, and I had some of my special education students tracking along with the story, raising their hand during the lesson, asking questions, answering the questions, and that was just really awesome to see, because I could also tell how proud they were of themselves, and it was just nice to look over and see them all following along and just really engaged in like what we were doing. So I loved seeing that just today.
And how do you collaborate with other teachers, support staff, and families to create an inclusive learning environment?
Yeah, so I think like that collaboration piece really happens all the time. I feel like we are always bouncing ideas off of each other. This school year especially, we've really made it a point where Monday mornings, myself, my co-teacher, the special ed teachers, and ed tech support, we all meet at the same time Monday morning, every Monday, and just talk about what does the week look like, what supports the students are going to need this week, what are the learning targets for the week. So we've really just made it a point to like make that time on Monday where we can all meet. We've even we write like what we've talked about down so we can go back to it. But that collaboration really does happen, I feel like, all the time. We're all working together on this big task. So yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, and next we have a second video. Credit goes to Mary Leonard, a teacher at the middle school who interviewed students and staff at TRIP regarding their current inclusionary practices.
Ooh, she fancied it. Nice.
She is the computer teacher.
Yeah.
My name's Amelia and I'm in 8th grade.
Overall, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the best, how successful do you feel in your classes?
An 8 or like 9 or 10. Last year I can earn 3s because I was doing grade level things, and this year I 10 because I'm doing grade level, and this year I'm like with more of my friends than last year.
So think about like in terms of like math. Last year you were in a smaller group math class, correct? Do you feel like you have more support this year, even though you're in a larger classroom with more kids? Or actually, let's talk about that. What's the size of your class last year compared to your size of your class this year?
Last year was really small and it's not an average size. This year it's like an average size like class.
Okay. And even though it's larger, how do you feel about how you're doing with the work?
Good, because that means I have like more people to ask questions.
Can you first tell us your name and what grade you're in?
Gabriel Adonis Ward in 8th grade.
8th grade. So last year for your crew or advisory, who did you have for a crew leader?
The chance.
And what was that experience like for you?
It was alright. The best, but it was alright.
And this year you've moved in to a more inclusive setting, and that is with Mr. Lucis, your advisor, correct? How's that experience been?
Much better.
Tell me why.
Because in my first placement of the year, I wasn't feeling included much, but I do feel it more now that I'm in classrooms.
Thanks. Can you explain the differences between like how your support has changed between last year and this year?
Well, last year I had someone with me at all times of PHP, but this year I don't. And this year I have to actually get up and ask for help more than just looking to my left or right.
Do you think that's been better for you?
Yeah.
Yeah. How come?
It makes me more self-reliant.
Prepare you better for your future?
Yes, it does.
Do you think maybe you've grown a little bit too as an individual? All right, good. So overall, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the best, how successful do you feel in your classes?
4.
A 4? You think that's different than last year?
Yeah.
What was last year?
Maybe a 2.
Maybe a 2, so it's gotten better? It's improved? Okay, why do you think that's different?
Better work environment.
Better work environment?
My name is Melissa Wig, and I am a EdTech 3 in the FSP program. So the majority of the students that are in our classroom are generally far below grade level, and get them in more socialized settings, because eventually they'll have to learn how to live and deal with people. So that's another thing that the program does, is go, okay, this is hard, but we still gotta be a part of it.
As time moves on, what do you think that this does for the students, having them in these UA classrooms?
That it does start to bring confidence, and I don't want as much help. Like they'll start telling you, like, I'm good, you don't need to help me right now if you ask questions, or you can just sit back and go, okay, so you know what, this might feel hard right this second, but I know you can do this, and I'll be right here if you desperately need me. But
Mr. Noah, one of the Unified coaches, shares some of his insights on Unified Champions.
But the teamwork really, I think, is what's beneficial for everybody involved, because you see kids on different levels, different spectrums, different learning capacities, stuff like that.
Do you think that, like when those kids are in that type of a learning environment, that it doesn't matter what their labels are?
Yeah, I don't think it has ever mattered in my 2 years here of helping out with that program. But those kids that do go above and beyond, they are trying so hard to get everyone to be inclusive.
My name is Adeline Williams, and I'm in 7th grade.
Okay. And you are part of Unified Champions. Can you describe Unified Champions to me, what it means to you?
It means to me that I'm able to use like my experiences and help others that aren't as able to do the things I am.
Have you built relationships with your peers?
Yes.
And what have those relationships been like?
It's exciting to see like the view that other people have on the world compared to like what I have.
Do you see any of these peers that you have in Unified Champions that you don't necessarily have classes with? Do you see them in the hallways or at lunchtime? And do you interact with them then?
I try to the most that I can.
Do you think you would have done that if you weren't part of Unified Champions?
Maybe, maybe not. I think it would depend, like on the situation.
So that is all we have for our presentation. We don't know if you have any questions or anything you'd like to discuss.
I have one question. The finding of over-reliance on separate locations for services. I mean, I think that there's almost like a natural tendency to want to group people into what they need and, you know, try to target, right, to that. I think, and I imagine we do that with gifted and talented program as well, right? Like we try to pull, you know, so I think the big question I have is how, when we put like this full spectrum of abilities from gifted to folks that have additional needs, like how do we accomplish meeting everyone's needs in these classrooms where it is so varied? And I feel like it's a question I'm certainly going to get asked, and I don't really know the answer. I imagine there's additional support staff that comes in for different reasons, but I don't know.
So I think right now we have it happening in two spaces. Number one is we're not doing this overnight. This is a 3 to 5 to 7 to 9 year transition. And our overall goal is to just, it's not to fully, well, that's not how I want to word it. It's to really look at students as individuals and see when and where it's appropriate to have them in the general ed setting. And I think right now, Jana, this is happening in math at the middle school, and it's happening, the 4th grade teacher that you met. We didn't get permission to video the students in the class because I think that would help us to get a better insight as to what that looks like. And I'll be in classrooms at the beginning of January at TES, trying to see for myself. I think we need to look at when it might be appropriate for student not to be included, but I think what we're doing now is trying to change our focus from, oh, this student needs reading instruction, we're going to pull them out for that 60 minutes and give it to them in another location, and they may not be getting materials that we know are vetted and are good quality materials for them. So there's a lot of thinking, and I know Rebecca can add to this because she's been in IEP meetings recently where she's starting to talk about this. I would like to also at some point present information where it is happening in pockets and hear from the principals and teachers that are doing that. Because I think you're right, you're gonna get asked questions, and please know we're not just taking all students that have IEPs and saying, okay, everybody's in this classroom now and we're gonna bring a myriad of folks in to help provide support, because I believe there's a balance. I think at some point you can get too many adults in the classroom. And it's really kind of a figuring out who's got what role, and Margaret talked about that planning meeting and how they decide. But do you have other things that you would add?
Well, the IMTSS team made our ultimate goal in 3 to 8 or 9 years.
I've extended it now.
However long it takes me, or it takes the districts, and to go through this process. But the national standard is 80% of students with IEPs are spending 80% of their time in the general education classroom, receiving that core instruction. Right now, we have 49.4% of students with IEPs spending 80% of their time in the general education classroom. So we want to be able to do the activities that we're talking about, provide really rich core curriculum that could be universally designed to be able to support all students' learning, and they can show you, and based on whether their ability, be able to demonstrate their learning in multiple ways. And then also really looking at what our interventionists, can our interventionists go into classrooms? Can our special education teachers go in? Can our OT, PT, speech be in classroom? Social workers supporting students during their school day in the classroom, along with our educational technicians. So at the same time, I don't want to bombard, because I think at the beginning of this, Kristen, our Principal Conway, was finding that she had a classroom with one teacher, but then multiple ed techs, and no one, there wasn't planning happening. And so you can see the different, and actually I've been in to observe Margaret's class when that initially was first starting to happen. But after they've worked with Jessica Epgar, and they've had some training, and they have their collaboration time, then they're able to move forward in this direction. I think the other thing is that I have been also someone that has been sitting in IEP meetings thinking they have this deficit, they need this research-based curriculum, it's an hour-long curriculum, it comes from a box, and they can't do that in class because they're gonna disrupt the learning of others, they need to go someplace else. And although, however skilled our special education teachers are, they can't teach them that and they can't do both. And they shouldn't do both. They really should be an expert in disabilities, where the classroom teacher is the expert in core instruction, and then work together and bring those together in those defined roles. So we have a long way to go, and it's gonna take us multiple years to be able to get there, to be able to support this process. But I think it's a commitment that we have at this point, and the DOE has, and we're fortunate to partner with some very skilled facilitators and gurus of inclusion to be able to support the process.
I think that's a good point that we didn't make. Like the report has all the numbers and percentages.
Yes.
We're not looking for 100% of students 100% of the time. We know that there's a wide range of abilities, but I think what we're trying to do now is we're trying to look for opportunities for inclusion. In my mind, there's no reason why all students can't be in a classroom when a story is being read. or when they're having a morning meeting, or when they're in a music class or an art class. I just don't see that personally. So I think those are the things we're trying to just increase the opportunities for inclusion rather than exclusion.
I remember Jessica Apgar saying one thing that like stuck with me, and she said like special education is a practice, it's not a place. And I really liked that quote. And then she kind of went on to explain that the idea of inclusion is to benefit everybody. So for instance, if you're doing like reading interventions, you have a group of kids that are your higher achieving readers. And so it gives them the ability to have like, you know, special instruction in the same classroom as another group that might be your lower readers that need more intervention. And they can be in the same classroom and getting specially designed instruction. It doesn't just benefit the like children in special education. So inclusion can benefit the entire classroom. And I just liked that quote where she was like giving an example of how it when you put it into practice, instead of making it be a separate place, it benefits everybody.
I did have an example of an IEP meeting, and I've been to a couple IEP meetings recently as part of as people in my role.
It's part of your job.
It's part of my job, I guess I should say. But there was, at an IEP meeting, a team was building the plan and talking about how much time the student, what the student's goals were, how that related to the services they were receiving. And the parents talked about their daughter coming home, who's in first grade, and was saying, I'm being removed from my class, I'm being removed, they're excluding me. And so, I had said, the dean was like, she's right, she is right, we are excluding her. And in the meantime, I was voting for more time in the general education setting, and but I think it's also the PD and the work we're doing with teachers to be able to even, shifting our language and being able to really look at the data and dig in and see where we can have pockets of students having more success in general education classrooms.
I have one more. And it kind of plays, one of the stories we heard from one of the classrooms was where we had some of the purposeful groupings of some of the higher achieving students with some of the students that weren't, that were struggling a bit. And, it's easy to see how that benefits some of the students that are struggling to have kind of the support from their higher achieving peers. And I think there's some mentoring benefits, right, of those higher achieving students. But I think some people could also see that though as maybe detracting from some of the higher educated, some of the higher achieving students. And I don't know if that is, again, I'm thinking of criticisms is what I'm thinking of, and I can see that being one of them. And I don't know if that is real, or if that is something that if it happens too much, that it starts to really detract from certain kids, or if it's good in moderation, or I don't know how we handle, I don't know how that is looked at. Again,
So, I'm familiar with the practice that they were doing. It's probably a turn and talk where like you and Carrie would turn and tell each other the answer to a question. And that would be it. Part of the reading program does have small group instruction, which is ability based.
Okay.
So kids still are able to get what they need, but it would be that, like if I have an IEP and Jamie's in the classroom without an IEP, we might just be placed next to each other so that when the story is read aloud and then there's an opportunity for questions, it might be like, turn and tell your neighbor what your favorite color is. So I know that I have a favorite color. I'm still able to tell Jamie. And I think that's a very simplistic example, but as I'm in classrooms more, I can see, and Rebecca too, and I think as principals start to see what's happening, they'll be able to answer those questions. Because I think you're right, we need to be aware that this may not be a popular practice. I think when we think about our students and where that we don't want to be advocating for exclusion, but we need to think about what's happening, and Rebecca's right, we have to do professional development. We're actually trying to slow some people down because they're ready to jump in, and we're like, wait, we gotta show you how to do this because we don't want you to stumble or feel like you're overwhelmed with planning. We wanna show you how we can support this and make this work. And I know at Jana's school, she's been working really hard to arrange some school visits where programs are successful so that her staff can actually see what that looks like in action.
I think my response to that, which may not be popular, would be that we are in the bottom 5 states for our inclusion. We are not in the top 5 for our academic performance. So I think you can't equate inclusion to worse academic performance. You can equate inclusion to better academic performance.
There is lots of academic research that, I mean, we've read all of that my entire career where there's no negative benefit to those high achieving students to be in an inclusive classroom.
And even though those high achieving students may have high test scores, they might have issues with socialization.
100%.
Or they might have issues with self-regulation.
Yeah.
And so having a peer that may have difficulty reading a passage, but they know how to treat somebody else and be respectful and be able to listen, I think there are opportunities there as well.
And I think even for older students may be machines at like really knowing answers and things, but are they flexible in their thinking? Are they creative? And sometimes those mixed classes is where you see some real interesting divergent thinking that pushes kids in ways that they wouldn't necessarily have been pushed if they're just grinding for a grade. At the high school level, that tends to be like middle school, high school, they start to get that way, and you can really push kids to think differently when they're around kids who think differently.
It's interesting. I've been thinking about a lot of this in the context of elementary school.
Yeah.
Frankly, because I feel like when we get to, as they start transitioning to college, it start to striate into different, academic achievement levels, right? I mean, I think that's still, right? But this is something we're talking about that would still be throughout the entire time here at MSAD52. We're not just talking about the grade, younger grade students here.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
But it is impactful, right, when we have our little first grader saying they're excluding me, what's gonna happen when, what is her outcomes or benefits going to be at the middle school and high school if she's been excluded all of this time? And so I know Gina and Eben have been working on, what does this look like now in their schools? And we're hoping that our data improves over time with these practices of consideration of including including 80% of our students with disabilities. So by the time they are in the middle school and high school, their post-secondary outcomes, they have a wide variety to pick from. At this point, I heard the director of the special education share last school year that 40% of students with disabilities leaving high school are employable when they leave high school, and that's not okay.
Right.
So everybody should have an opportunity to be employed and have those skills.
Do you guys see, or do you guys have an idea of, say the trend isn't showing that it's not as productive as expected, would there be an idea of an abort out of it, or do you guys, just a backup plan on it? Because it's more just, always having a plan B, I guess.
Right.
And knowing if you're committed to it, obviously, but all of a sudden you feel like it's not going the way that you guys expected. you know.
I think the plan B would be that our implementation isn't as it should be going. That we're just saying to teachers, okay, these 3 students have IEPs, they're in your class now.
Go for
That to me would be, if things don't appear to be working and we have all this other research that shows it works, that would tell me that we need to look at what we're doing, that maybe we've gone too fast, or like we've given you example from 2 schools. We didn't tell these 2 schools that they had to do it. Their principals had to be ready to say, this is something that I believe in, that we wanna try now. But I know, like, I've been hesitant to have things happen too quickly without training and ongoing support. You just can't send somebody to a conference for a day and then say, oh, they know how to do it. So you have to build time into the schedule for them to work together and plan together. And I think if things aren't working, it could be looking at each student, like, is it because one student's needs aren't being met? Or is it that the entire system has failed us? And I think Rebecca mentioned our 2 consultants who are experts. They're published, they have done this research. And we're paying the money because we feel like Rebecca and I have talked about this, okay, well, we can run a meeting. Well, we can run a meeting, but we don't have the expertise that they do yet. So we are trying to go slow to go fast, I guess. But we will be monitoring things very closely. For individual students and then for schools and as the district.
What's in your idea of like maybe 8 to 9 years of what makes you, and is that just getting everybody educated enough? You think it's gonna take, you know, and slow roll it that way to make it implemented?
Yeah, I mean, I keep adding time kind of facetiously because I think we were gonna start the handbook in October and it's gonna start in January. So I think we have 2 schools this year that are doing pockets of this work, so then we would want to start looking at, so what's working well, what needs to be changed. If Rebecca and I are supporting this work, we aren't gonna have capacity to support all 6 schools all at once. So it may be that next year we added another school, or by the end of this year, Shannon's sitting here listening and it's like, okay, this is what I need to do here too. So it could be the phase-in, and then it's not going to be all students all at once. So it is going to take a while to phase in, but I would say in 7 years, I would like to say 5, but let's say 5, 6 years, the systems would be in place, that this is a solid practice, that we're just continuing to support the work, we're not ramping up the work anymore. That's just the way we do services for our students, that we educate our students.
Thank you.
And the equity review has like all the research and stuff. That's part of that as well. But Jessica and Kate had said it averaged it, if you were to do a district-wide, or even per school, it takes 3 to 5 years to be able to, as Teresa was talking about, build all the structures and supports.
It seems like a significant shift, and I can imagine it takes some time.
It's like a Titanic.
It is significant.
Yeah.
You probably, there's probably no real way to really fully explain. But I know for me, just coming into the district, I do know that it was pretty standard, like there weren't choices. Like I see it as, at every IEP meeting, there's actual real choices, that it's not just, you have, if you're gonna get services in reading, you're gonna go to this classroom, and we're not in that place. We're getting there, but we're definitely not in that place. Like that's an actual, there's, you can really look at what the kid needs and make those decisions, and it's not just an automatic. But I think what Teresa and Rebecca have done is really work to get buy-in, right? Because if you just push people to do something and they don't understand it and they don't know why, and it's just then it's, you get pushback and it blows up. So I think this process has been really, really strong.
I'm glad we've been able to pull in the expertise from you and Mr. Maine Farmington. I mean, that's been helpful, so.
Can we get the report? Is that a thing?
Yep,
Okay.
yes.
Yeah, I'd like to see it.
Anyone else? Great, thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Real exciting next topic. Bids have been received.
This is exciting.
So we'll start by seeing if someone could make a motion for the consideration and approval of the PTB recommendation for the wastewater treatment plant construction bid.
So moved.
Anthony, is there a second?
Wait, do we have the full language?
No.
Kyle's got the full language.
Oh.
I got it
Sorry.
somewhere here.
I was waiting for him to
Take it
jump
out.
in. I
There
thought
we
he was
go.
gonna like
There we
take
go.
the invite, but like, we gotta get it.
Kyle, why don't you just make a motion that
I
is
updated
fully,
the meeting.
fully detailed? I was gonna ask
I
what.
found it.
Okay.
Jeez. You want me to give it to you again?
Yeah.
Can I get a motion to approve the PTB committee recommendation to award the bid for the construction of a new wastewater treatment plant to the low bidder, Apex Construction, for, drumroll, $2,059,458, and authorize superintendent to send notice of intent to award a letter to Apex Construction.
Okay, Alex, with a second by Anthony, and discussion. Go ahead.
I just have a, like, silly question. Where is Apex out of?
Chicora, New Hampshire, their offices, they've always been established in New Hampshire, but all their employees are up here in Maine. So they've, like the lead guy would be, he lives in Gray. They got people up in Bangor. I used to actually work for them, so I know them pretty well. So, but they've, yeah, most of all their employees live here. So,
And they specialize in this type of project.
yeah, that's all they do is wastewater treatment plants and
And it looks like it was about a $200,000 differential.
which is pretty decent bid. And
Know that they were fairly close, but
Yeah.
still,
Yeah.
but significant enough that it's not like.
Not close enough
Not-
for the
yeah, not-
in-town
Right,
nod.
right.
Yeah. And they have like a location in Auburn that they have a place just a lay down yard that they run everything out of. They're real close with T-Buck, so they've kind of competitors, like friendly competitors.
And I think the site work was gonna be contracted to, Hewlin and Son, but, yeah, not the old one, the new one. So,
Okay.
Which they're local.
yeah, they're local, obviously, yeah.
I don't have anything personally. Anyone else have questions about this?
This is for like, actually like.
Building.
Thank you for noting that. Thank you.
I know, I should have said that.
There
when I
will
got it.
actually be a new wastewater treatment plant.
Wow, okay.
I mean, what are the milestone dates? I mean, do we have those that were in this contract?
We do not yet have those.
I feel like well, I mean, they bid on a completion date, right?
Right, so anticipated to be done before, what was it, March of 27?
Oh my.
I don't
Oh,
remember.
So yeah,
What are we
we're gonna
going
have a
into? We're going into
contract. but it's
25,
not-
sorry,
25.
26.
Yeah,
All
26,
right.
I was gonna say,
I'm working
yeah.
on a different budget, so my
Yeah,
years are screwed up.
Yeah.
Way back when it was
So by-
August of 20.
By signing this contract, we'll have a wastewater treatment plant for that price by March of '26.
At the latest, but
Okay.
we should be moving soon.
Okay,
That was the motion.
all right. All right, so seeing no more questions, all those in favor? That is unanimous. All
And
right.
we did talk about Evan flushing the first toilet.
Oh.
He gets the first look.
First.
All right, so thank you all for coming. Our next item is a request to enter into executive session for continued discussion of superintendent of schools evaluation pursuant to 1 MRSA 4056D. 3, is there a second? Second is Crystal. All those in favor? Very good. Are we moving or can we just stay right here?
It's probably easier for us to